The hayloft groaned in the midnight hush, every timber giving a low, tired creak an editor would hear as that wood settling before anything else. A slow rustle of straw followed, soft enough to blend with the steady breath of the sleeping ranch. Ronan Hale froze at the ladder. Because that breath wasn't his horse's. It belonged to a woman curled on the hay. Elara Finch. A name he hadn't heard in 12 long years, and never expected to hear her again out here. He stared, and the mystery hit him harder than fear. Why was she back on his land at all? The hayloft groaned again, the old beams giving off that lonely, hollow creak Ronan Hale had come to know better than his own heartbeat. He paused at the ladder, listening to the dry whisper of straw shifting in the rafters, soft, tired, the sound of the wrench that had forgotten laughter. Most nights, the quiet didn't bother him. Most nights, he welcomed it. But tonight, something in that softness felt wrong. Rowan climbed the last rung and stopped cold. A woman lay curled in the hay, her breath shallow, her clothes dusted with road grit, her hair tangled like someone who'd run too far for too long. The straw shifted under her weight, another fragile rustle that struck him harder than a shout would have. He knew her face. God helped him, he knew it. Elara Finch. 12 years gone. 12 years buried under things he refused to name. She looked thinner than memory, paler, as if the world had been scraping pieces off her since the day she disappeared. Her boots were worn to the stitching. One was missing a heel. She must have walked miles like that, or fled them. Ronan exhaled through his nose, a long, tired breath that stirred the hay. He didn't want this. Didn't want her. Didn't want whatever trouble had dragged her into his loft. He thought of the simplest answer. Wake her. Tell her to leave. Let the night take her the way it had taken everything else. But when he stepped closer, the floorboard beneath him groaned, a deep, aching sound that filled the dark like a wounded animal, and Elara flinched in her sleep. Her fingers tightened around nothing. Her face twisted the way a cornered creature tightens before the blow. Ronan froze. That look wasn't hunger or exhaustion. It was terror. The kind that stayed in the bones. He swallowed a curse. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't a trespasser. This was a piece of his past curled up and breaking in his hay. And despite everything in him screaming to walk away, he bent down and lifted her. She was lighter than he remembered. Too light. Her head fell against his shoulder, and for a moment the loft returned to silence. No creak, no rustle, just the soft, uneven rhythm of her breath. Ronan carried her down the ladder, the wood complaining under his boots with every step, like the ranch itself disapproved of his choice. He crossed the yard, the night wind tugging at his coat, whispering all the reasons he shouldn't be doing this. But he didn't stop. He pushed open his front door, the hinges giving a low, tired moan. And for the first time in 12 years, Ronan Hale carried Elara Finch into his home. The stove whispered awake when Ronan fed it kindling. Warmth licked the small kitchen, spreading out from the iron like the sun pushing through fog. Elara sat at the table, fingers tracing the rim of a chipped mug as if memorizing it. Her hands trembled. Not from cold. From memory. Ronan moved without fanfare. He set a plate. He put stew into it. The spoon clinked against enamel. Sound in the hush felt loud as thunder. She ate with small bites. The food warmed her cheeks. The house answered with little sounds, pot settling, chairs shifting, the soft creak of the floor. Noise became a kind of kindness. He watched her. Watched the way she tucked hair behind one ear and shielded her eyes from the stove's heat. Watched the way she checked the door after each bite, as if expecting someone to push through it. When she spoke, it was the bravest thing. "Thank you," she said. 2 words. They filled the room. Ronan grunted. A sound like a shrug shrugged across his face. He didn't say much. Never had. It was easier to feed someone than to explain why you let them stay. Night came in slow. Cold pooled in corners the stove couldn't reach. The wind found the seams in the shutters and threaded itself through. Every draft felt like an accusation. He passed her a blanket. She held it like a shield. He sat across the table and listened to her breathe. It became the small quiet of two people learning to share a space. She began to do the small things. Sweep the porch at dawn. Fill the kettle. Fold shirts with a careful patience Ronan hadn't seen in himself in years. The house softened around her hands. A dog's bark came from the neighbor's yard, sharp and sudden. Elara's shoulders tightened. She peered to the window as if mapping escape routes. Ronan's knuckles whitened on the table. A reminder that the world beyond the fence existed and could bite. They worked side by side. Ronan mended a fence post while Elara tied sacks in the lean-to. Their movements were measured. The chores kept them honest. Noise, hammer, rope, hooves, filled the air, turning silence into a rhythm. She told him scraps. Small truths that fit in a breath. She'd hitched with a trader for a while. She'd stayed out of sight. She'd slept under stars that smelled like rain and worry. He didn't ask where she'd come from. He let things sit like stones between them. Some stones you moved one at a time. Some you learned to stand on. A shadow crossed the lane at dusk. Two riders, slow, talking low. Elara froze mid-sweep. Her hands dropped. The silence snapped like a stretched wire. Ronan watched them pass, the sound of their conversation swallowed by the wind. He heard one name drift clear, someone he'd hoped never to hear again. Days folded into each other. A slow thaw. Her laugh, single and surprised, came out like a bird startled into flight. It startled him in return. The house learned to hold it. On a wet morning she scrubbed the pots until her fingers reddened. Steam wrapped around her face like a veil. When she spoke of the river town, her voice pulled tight and then eased, as if practicing breathing again. Ronan swept by and glanced at her hands, at the way they bore tiny calluses from honest work. A knock at the door that evening rattled the windows. 3 quick beats. Elara's eyes went to the hinges. Ronan's heart jumped like a trapped thing. He opened the door to find a cart driver kneading oats. A small thing. But the knocker lingered in the quiet. A reminder that footsteps could choose to return. They planted a square of vegetables by the back fence. Cold soil gave way under their hands. Elara's fingers left neat rows where she pressed seeds in one by one. They talked while they worked in the way of people mending fences, talk that grazed the surface but never dove. She slept in the small guest room at first. The blanket smelled faintly of smoke and road. Ronan had carried a lantern into the hall and stood there, measuring the house with his eyes. Noise became the watch, the kettle's whistle, the wind sigh, the clock's slow tick. At night she woke sometimes, staring at the doorway as if someone could appear in the dark like a bad memory. She would whisper a name into the air and then pull the blanket up to her chin. Ronan would stand outside the room and listen to the tiny noises she made, breathing, shifting, the small snore that followed when sleep chased away the fear. The stove's warmth grew into a daily thing, then a promise. It chased frost from the window panes and made their coffee taste like hope. Silence, once heavy, thinned into pauses. Noise became the texture of home. Once, while she mended a shirt by lamplight, a rider's shout echoed from the far road. She flinched and the needle pricked her finger. A drop of blood stained the sleeve. She froze, eyes wet. Ronan closed the shutters with a slow, deliberate motion. Outside, the world kept talking. Inside, they sealed themselves against it. Time smoothed daggers. Her hands found rhythms. She hummed under her breath when she worked. A small song for simple things. Ronan caught himself smiling in the doorway and did not hate the sight. Letters arrived sometimes. Bills. A prospectus from town. One folded note without a return address slid under the door one morning. Elara paled when she saw it. She crushed it in her fist and let the paper crease like a howled sob. Ronan did not pry. He put a hand on her shoulder instead. She looked at him then, in the late light, and for a moment the past and the present hung together in her gaze. There was fear there still. There was also a slow, stubborn hope. The thaw had started, and neither of them could tell where the ice would finally break. The morning began with warmth stretching slowly across the kitchen floor. Thin lines of sunlight slipped through the window and landed on Elara's bare feet as she wiped the counter clean. The stove ticked as it cooled from breakfast. Rowan stood near the door, coat half on, watching her move through the room as though she'd always belonged there. She felt his eyes, her shoulders stiffened, not in fear, not in ease, something in between. "I'll be checking the north fence," he said after clearing his throat. She paused in the warm light. "Be careful," she whispered. The words hung between them like a fragile porcelain cup. Rowan stepped outside. The cold air pressed harder than the silence indoors. Far-off hoofbeats drifted over the hills, faint but enough to pull his gaze west, a reminder that danger had legs and memory. Inside, Elara moved through each room, opening windows just enough to let in warmth without letting her thoughts spill into the open. Dust lay thick on everything except the table Ronan used and the stove that kept the cold at bay. At the mantel, her fingers hovered over a small wooden horse, hand-carved, simple. She lifted it gently. Dust fell from its mane like a tiny snowfall. Ronan's voice from years ago drifted through her memory, a carving meant for someone who never arrived. A shadow crossed her face, then eased as she set it back. Later she hauled water from the pump behind the house. The metal shrieked in protest, and cold splashed over her wrists, sharp enough to make her gasp. She carried the bucket inside, the floorboards creaking under her steps. Each act of cleaning wove small sounds through the stillness, warming the house as if it had been waiting for her hands. By noon Ronan returned, mud on his boots, coat damp with frost, smelling of cedar and winter wind. "You've been busy," he said, a hint of a smile in his voice. "Trying to earn my keep. So long as you're here, you don't owe me anything." His words brushed warmth against thoughts that had gone colder. She looked down, the cloth in her hands twisting. Belonging was dangerous, too near hope. She made lunch while he washed up. The soft clatter of dishes filled the silence, a comforting rhythm. As steam rose from the stew pot, Ronan's shoulders loosened. He'd forgotten what it felt like to hear a house live again. They ate quietly, not strained, not awkward, just two people learning the same language from opposite ends. Afterward, she stepped outside to shake dust from a rug. Clouds had gathered low and heavy. The sky smelled of snow. Thunder cracked suddenly, sharp as a whip. Her knees buckled. Rona appeared at the door, coat half on. "You all right?" "Just startled," she said, though fear flickered behind her eyes. Inside, the storm pressed against the windows with a steady roar. Wind clawed at the shutters. Elara lit the lamps early, warm amber pushing back the cold. She turned to the kitchen and kneaded dough with quiet intensity, palms pressing out old anxieties. The dough softened, so did she. Rowan watched from the doorway, puddles forming under his boots. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. The smell of rising bread tugged at a tenderness he'd buried. A sudden rap on the back window made Elara jump. Her hands froze, dusted with flour. Ronan stepped forward. A loose shutter flapped violently in the wind, knocking again. Just the storm, but the sound lingered like a reminder that something worse could knock next. He secured the shutter. Elara exhaled shakily, warmth from the lamp softening her fingers back into motion. Evening settled into a fragile peace. They made a simple stew, Rona chopping vegetables in blunt, steady strokes while Elara stirred the pot in slow circles. The kitchen filled with noise, chopping, boiling, the low hum of two people deciding not to run from each other. After dinner, they cleaned together. Elara hummed a wavering tune, something like creek water and old lullabies. The sound softened the wind's fists outside. Ronan paused at the hall doorway. "You can take the sewing room," he said. "It's not much, but better than the guest room." She looked at him, really looked, and something in his chest tightened. "I'd like that." He led her down the hall with a lantern. The sewing room was small, faded by sun, smelling faintly of cedar. A rocking chair sat by the window, untouched for years. She brushed her fingers across it. The wood groaned softly, like grief stirring awake. A gust of wind rattled a loose pane. She flinched. Rowan steadied the doorframe. "If the storm gets bad, call for me." "I will." She didn't step forward or back. something inside the space shifted, a slow thaw. He nodded once and walked away, boots softening as he moved toward the glowing kitchen. Elara stood in the doorway, warm lamplight touching her face, cold wind brushing the glass behind her, caught between past and possibility. Then she stepped fully into the room and left the door open. Home small sounds drifted in, fire crackling, a pot settling, warm sounds, living sounds. She closed her eyes and let them settle against her ribs, like a promise she wanted to believe in. The morning light came thin and deliberate, slipping under the shutters like a cautious guest. Elara arranged the kitchen table with the care of someone placing bones back in order. She set the coffee pot, damped grounds into the din, and watched steam lift like a small, obedient ghost. Ronan stood in the doorway, shoulders hunched against the last breath of dawn. He said nothing, never much for words. He measured life with his hands, with the way he repaired a hinge or checked a latch. She poured him coffee. The cup warmed his palm. Warmth against cold. A promise against a memory. They ate almost silently, the clink of spoons the loudest sound between them. Later, she took up a broom and moved through the house like she was sweeping out shadows. The small noises, straw shifting, a loose floorboard ticking, dust falling, stitched the silence into something bearable. Ronan watched her from his chair. His jaw worked once, then again, like someone unknotting a rope. "You've got away with this place," he said last. Simple. True. "It takes less time to make a home livable than it does to forget why you wanted one," she answered. The words landed like pebbles in the quiet. They moved through the day in small harmonies. She mended shirts by the window, warm light pooled around her hands. He sharpened tools in the shed, the cool air scented with leather and oil. When she hummed under her breath, the sound drifted to him, loosening something in his shoulders. He recognized the melody from somewhere, half dream, half memory, but he didn't ask. He taught her to load a feed sack without tearing it. She taught him to stitch a seam that would hold. In their trades was a softness, trust exchanged in small measured doses. The house absorbed their steps like an old animal learning to welcome hands again. A neighbor's boy raced past with a stray dog, laughter trailing him like a guide. Elara watched them go, smiling, small, surprised. For a moment, the sound felt like trespass against the hush Ronan had lived in for years. But when it faded, it left the air lighter than before. That afternoon they mended the porch swing. Rusted bolts protested, wood splintered under stubborn effort. Shoulder to shoulder, they worked until the swing took weight again, groaning like a relieved beast. That night, Ronan asked about leaving. He spoke of boundaries, of nights he'd take watch, of how he wouldn't push her to stay. His voice was careful, like setting a trap for a wild thing without touching it. She answered in fragments. She'd come because she knew the land. She'd come because she'd hope. She'd come because nowhere else felt like a place without questions. Her voice thinned at the last words. Ronan heard the tremor and let silence act as shield. As dusk fell, the stove hummed its steady domestic song. Warmth pooled around their feet. Outside, cold rode the ridge like a patient wolf. The contrast made every small domestic sound sacred. They ate stew and broke bread. The clatter of bowls, the scrape of a spoon, noise that stitched them into a shared shape. When Elara laughed, Ronan made a soft, reluctant sound that almost passed for contentment. Later, a rider's shadow crossed the back road and paused near the fence. Elara went still, hands suspended above the table. A reminder that safety was never permanent, always negotiable. Ronan left the room and returned with the rifle on his shoulder. He set it in the corner where lamplight caught the barrel. A silent statement. The house swallowed the sight, but the air tasted faintly of copper and worry. Days folded into a slow routine. They learned each other's habits, how Ronan left his boots by the door, how Elara folded napkins twice. She found rhythm with the chickens, her gentleness calming them. Ronan watched her in the yard and felt the fence around his private world shift inward. They traded memories in jagged pieces, scraps of pasts held carefully, like broken glass. Sometimes a laugh softened an edge, Sometimes silence handled what words could not. Small noises, a distant bell, an owl, a dog's low growl, kept the quiet honest. On the 7th day, a letter arrived, officially looking and folded tight. Elara paled at the name on the envelope. Her hand trembled as she slid it to Ronan. He read the sharp printed words. A claim. A warning. Not yet a threat, but close. He placed it on the mantel to let the sun bleach it, as if light could dull its meaning. They didn't speak of it that night. Instead, they set the table for two and let simple objects, salt, bread, ceramic, hold the space where fear might have settled. At night, Elara sometimes woke and listened to the house breathe. The creaks became a language she was learning. The clock tick, a metronome of safety. She watched the stars through the window, and Ronan, out on the porch, watched them too. Distance held, but the same cold pinned them both like a shared shadow. One evening, a wagon rolled down a lane carrying a traveling minstrel. He brought a fiddle and a voice that sounded like road dust. Music filled the kitchen, warming the corners cold had claimed. Elara danced in slow circles. Ronan watched, the lines near his eyes softening. At dawn the minstrel left, humming a song that carried a name Elara recognized from a folded scrap she once kept close. The tune unraveled a memory she tried to bury. She stared at her hands. Ronan noticed, touched her elbow, steady, gentle, not claiming. A promise instead of possession. Warmth filled the rooms, cold lingered at the edges. Silence and noise played like children testing a shoreline. Something soft was growing, slow, insistent. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to root anyway, even in trembling ground. They went to bed with the windows shut and the stove breathing low. A faraway rider coughed in the dark and then disappeared. They said nothing. They didn't need to. The house kept its small sounds. And the two of them kept learning how to listen. The rhythm of the place settled into the rooms like a second skin. The morning broke colder than it should have for late spring. Ronan felt it the moment he stepped onto the porch, the thin, metallic bite of air that didn't belong, the kind that carried news before words could. Elara was inside stirring a pot of beans, the spoon tapping the rim with slow, steady rhythm. Warmth filled the kitchen behind her. Cold pressed against the yard in front of him. He scanned the road. Nothing moved. But the silence had weight. A silence that didn't match the rustling grass or the distant cry of a hawk. He stayed there, one hand on the post, listening. The ranch had its own voice, creaks, wind sighs, the small crackle of settling beams. This was different. Too still. Too deliberate. Inside, Elara tasted the stew and winced at the salt. She added more water, letting warmth build across her face as steam rolled upward. Norse filled the kitchen, gentle, domestic, busy. She didn't notice Ronan standing still outside. Not yet. He turned back inside only when he felt the tension crawling up his spine. "Riders?" she asked softly, the question coming out before she meant to let it slip. "Not sure," he answered. But he didn't take off his coat. A flicker of fear crossed her eyes. Small. Quick. But he saw it. The stew bubbled louder, masking the quiet between them. They ate with the tension sitting across the table like a third guest. Every clink of the spoon was sharper. Every scrape of the bowl carried a warning. Ronan kept glancing toward the window. Elara kept glancing toward him. Warmth on her cheeks. Cold against his shoulders. The rhythm of the morning was broken. They moved through chars side by side. He held hay to the horses. She repaired a tear in one of the saddle blankets. The barn smelled of dust, warm leather, and old wood. Then the wind carried a new noise. Hoofbeats. Slow. Measured. Approaching. Elara froze mid-stitch. The blanket slipped from her fingers. Ronan's hand tightened around the pitchfork. Not enough to use. Just enough to decide. A silhouette appeared at the far edge of the yard, tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, riding a chestnut gelding. The horse snorted once. The rider didn't. Elara took a step back, then another. Ronan saw it. All of it. The tremble in her breath, the whiteness of her knuckles, the way her body recognized something before her voice could. The rider dismounted with slow, confident ease. Boots met earth with soft, heavy thuds. Noise cut the silence. Sharp, rude, bold. "Morning," the man called. His voice had a smile in it, the kind that never reached the eyes. Rowan stepped forward. "Help you with something?" The man dusted off his coat. Long fingers, careful movements, a predator's patience. "Looking for someone," he said. "A woman." Elara's breath hitched behind Ronan. He didn't turn. The man continued, casual as a Sunday stroll. "Name's not important." She left without settling a few things. "I'm sure you understand." Ronan didn't answer. Silence stretched long between them, cold and sharp-edged. The man smiled again. "Well now, I imagine folks pass through. Hard to keep track." Ronan had kept his face unreadable. "Don't get many strangers." The man nodded, glancing around slowly. Barn, porch, kitchen window, smoke rising from the stove. "A quiet place you've got here." Ronan didn't blink. "Prefer it that way." Elara slipped back into the barn shadows, breath small and quick. Warmth from the sun didn't reach her there. Only cold fear held her ribs. The stranger adjusted his belt. "You see someone fits the description. Tell her Mr. Cattering wants a word." He mounted his horse in one smooth motion. The gelding kicked up dust. The man tipped his hat. Then he rode off down the road, leaving cold dread in his wake. Ronan watched until the dust settled. The silence afterward felt wrong, thin and trembling, like a wire pulled taut. He went to the barn. Elara stood with her back against the wall, breathing like someone who'd outrun a storm. Ronan stepped inside, the barn door groaning behind him. "He knows," she whispered. It wasn't a question. Not really. Ronan didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman from the loft again. Worn down, frayed, terrified, but stronger than she knew. "He suspects," Ronan said finally. "And that's enough." She pressed her palms to her face. Warmth from her skin, cold from the air, noise from her breathing, silence from everything else. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice broke. "I didn't mean to bring this to your door." Ronan shook his head. The movement was small, but firm. "You didn't bring him," he said. "Men like him follow their own shadows." Another sound drifted across the land, a distant echo of hooves returning to the main trail. A reminder, a promise, a threat. They stood there a moment, suspended in that uneasy blend of warmth and cold. Fear and safety, noise and the things left unsaid. "We'll manage," Ronan said, his voice low, steady. Elara lowered her hands, eyes shining with something between disbelief and gratitude. The barn swallowed the next gust of wind. The horses shifted in their stalls, restless but calm enough under Ronan's gaze. He reached for her coat, held it out. A simple gesture, but it built a bridge where fear had tried to crack the earth open. She slipped into it without a word. They stepped outside together. The sun was warm on their faces. The wind was cold on their backs. Noise from the kitchen drifted toward them, pot settling, fire crackling, the house trying its best to stay ordinary. But the road was no longer empty, and the silence ahead was not friendly. They felt it in the dirt beneath their boots, in the air between them, in the shadow the rider had left behind. The thought had not ended, but winter had found them again. The cold settled early that morning, not the honest cold of weather, but the kind that carried warning in its teeth. Rowan felt it before he opened his eyes. A pressure in the air, a silence wound too tight to be natural. In the kitchen, Elara stood by the stove, hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee. She hadn't slept. The dark rings beneath her eyes confirmed it. Ronan lit the fire again, the logs crackling as warmth crawled across the floorboards like a cautious animal. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter, as if listening. They ate in near silence, spoons tapping, chairs shifting, tiny familiar noises pushing against something heavier waiting at the edges of the morning. Twice Elara tried to speak. Twice she closed her mouth again. Ronan didn't push, but he waited. He always waited. Finally, she whispered, "He won't stop." Ronan didn't look up from his plate. He didn't need to. "Catering?" Her breath hitched. "Yes." Warmth from the stove brushed their faces. Cold from the window slid down their backs. The contrast scraped like a blade. After breakfast, Ronan stepped outside to check the yard. Thin frost glazed the fence rails despite the season. The world held its breath. Then he saw them, 2 sets of hoofprints in the dirt. Fresh. One approaching. One leaving. Not Kettling's horse. Different shoes. Someone else had been here. Watching. Circling. He knelt, running his thumb along the print edge. The cold bit him hard. Elara stepped into the doorway, a blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, her breath fogging in the air. "You found something." "Someone else came through," Ronan said. "Someone scouting." Her knees softened. She caught the doorframe, the wood groaning under her grip. Inside, he paced the living room. She followed, hesitant. "Tell me," he said. "What does Catterling want?" Her face turned away. "He owns land, businesses, a beat, people." Ronan stiffened. "People?" She swallowed. "I was part of a deal, not by my choosing." The house went still except for the fire's faint hiss. Warmth flickered, cold thickened. "You think he'll send others?" Ronan said quietly. "I think he already has." The words settled like dust on old graves. "He doesn't like losing things he paid for," she whispered, arms tightening around herself. Ronan stepped closer, jaw taut. "You're not a thing." Her eyes shimmered, but before she could answer, a thud outside cut the moment short. A bucket toppled. Wind? Animal? Or something else? Ronan grabbed the rifle and moved to the window. A crow burst from the fence, wings loud in the too still air. Too sudden. A reminder that peace had become fragile as glass. They didn't relax. Later, they worked in the barn. The smell of hay mixed with leather and dust. Ronan replaced a loose board. Elara brushed down a mirror. Warm breath from the horse misted against her hands while cold drafts curled around her legs. Rowan hammered. Each strike echoed like a heartbeat forced into a run. "He'll burn this place down just to flush me out," Elara said suddenly. The hammer stilled. Ronan turned slowly. "Not while I'm breathing." Her eyes met his. No comfort there, only truth. "You don't understand him," she said softly. "He doesn't fight fair. He doesn't fight out in the open." Then we watched the shadows. The barn door slammed, rattling the hinges. Wind, or something pretending to be wind. Ronan moved first. Elara followed, breath quick. He flung the door open. Only dust swirling across the yard. A hawk circling overhead. But the feeling lingered. Someone had been there. Recently. "Let's go inside." Back in the house, tension thickened. The kettle whistled, shrill, almost panicked. Elara grabbed it with shaking hands. Steam curled around her wrists. Ronan steadied it. Their fingers brushed. A brief warmth. Too brief. They sat at the table with untouched tea. Wind scraped the siding like fingernails. "He'll come back," she said. "And he won't be alone next time." Ronan leaned back, chair creaking. "What does he want you for?" She hesitated, then breathed it out. "He bought my parents' debts. Forced a marriage. I ran the night he threatened to put me in my place." Ronan's hand tightened around the table edge. Wood groaned. "Why here?" he asked. Her breath trembled. Because I remembered this place, and I remembered you. Silence fell thick as snowfall. Warmth from the stove touched their legs, dread crept up their spines. A horse neighed outside, startled, agitated. Ronan rose instantly. On the porch, a piece of parchment flapped on a nail. He tore it free. Note. Short. Cruel. Your runaway's debt is due. Return what's mine, or I will take payment another way. No signature. No need. Cold carved through Ronan's coat. Elara stood behind him, breath hitching when she saw the words. She stepped back, then back again. It's not just Kittering anymore, Ronan said softly. He's pulling others into it. I told you, she whispered. He won't stop. Ronan folded the note, jaw set like iron. Let him come. She shook her head. He'll kill you. You don't know what he's capable of. Rowan had stepped closer, his warmth brushing the cold between them. I know what I'm capable of, he said. And I'm not letting him take you. Fear and relief warred on her face. Outside, the wind moaned. Inside, the fire crackled like a heartbeat trying to keep pace. No more guessing. The threat had stepped into the light, and the next time Kittering came, he wouldn't come to talk. Night fell fast, a hard black that swallowed the last of the sun in one greedy mouthful. The stove hummed low in the kitchen, a small island of warmth against the creeping cold. Elara sat by the table with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, hands folded like a prayer. Her fingers twitched under the wool. The room smelled of stew and wood smoke, safe things that tried to make the dark less sharp. Ronan moved like the house, slow, deliberate, used to the creak and complaint of old wood. He checked the windows once, twice, fingers testing the latches. Noise filled his checks, the whisper of cloth, the scrape of iron, the tiny echo of his boots. Silence answered back in the spaces between. A wind pushed at the eaves in the house side. Outside, the world was full of distant sounds, dogs, a far-off train, the soft breaking of hooves on a main road. They were ordinary noises, but tonight they felt like messengers. Elara stared into her cup as if the tea could tell her a plan. She kept looking toward the door, as if the threshold were a thin membrane the world could pass through at any time. Warmth kissed her face, cold edged at her neck. She did not move. At the 400-word mark, there came a sharp rap at the front door, 3 quick knocks, no greeting. Elara flinched. Her chair scraped the floor in a small, startling noise. Ronan went to the door with the rifle across his back, each step measured, the wooden floorboards answering with low groans. He opened the door a crack and peered out. 2 men stood in the lamplight, backs straight, faces half hidden under hats. One wore a long coat dark as a winter field. The other had a rifle slung over his shoulder and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Evening, the long-coated man said. His voice was smooth, too smooth, like oil on cloth. Ronan kept his hand on the door. State your business. The man looked past him, toward the warm glow of the kitchen. Just passing through, he said. Thought I'd see if the family's well. Elara's breath came short. She stepped back from the table, every muscle tensed. Silence gathered like a storm cloud. Noise, the man's boots on the porch, seemed suddenly loud enough to cut skin. Ronan detected it, a slight scent of tobacco, horse sweat, the metallic tang of money and menace. He shut the door slowly but left it unlatched, a wedge of shadow for negotiation. Not much family here, he said. Just me and a boarder. The boarder, the man repeated, considering. Heard about a woman passing through. Bright hair. Freckled. His eyes flicked sharp and quick to the window where Elara stood. Best make sure your guest isn't causing any trouble. Ronan's jaw tightened. You'll do your asking elsewhere. The man's smile thinned. You don't want trouble, friend. Trouble makes trouble come. The warning scraped at the doorframe. A small, leather thudding sound, one of the man's boots, left a mark on the wood. Ronan's fingers ached around the rifle stock. Inside, the stove's warmth seemed suddenly small. When they left, they did not ride away. They strolled down the lane on foot, boots muffled by wet dirt, voices low and conspiratorial. The long coat swallowed the lamplight, the other's laugh was brittle. Their backlit figures moved with a confidence bred in towns where law bends like a twig. Ronan watched until their shapes vanished into the black and the night grew whole again. He closed the door and bolted it then, the click loud as a verdict. Elara pressed her palms to her cheeks as if holding herself together with both hands. Warmth leaked from the house slower now, drawn out by worry. They tried to settle back into routine. Rowan checked the locks twice more and stacked wood high by the stove. Elara mended a curtain with fingers that trembled slightly. Each stitch made a soft, tiny sound that nodded into the dark between them. At the next quarter mark, hello, rhythmic thudding began in the distance, hooves approaching fast. They both froze. The sound swelled, multiplied. 4 riders came from the ridge, cutting across the field like black teeth. The leader carried Catterling's cut mark, a limp in his horse's gait and a hand-worn badge of a man who'd been too important to be slowed by conscience. He rode with the arrogance of men who thought property meant ownership of people. His companions' faces were set in blank masks. Noise from their approach shredded the frangible hush. Rowan stepped onto the porch with the rifle like a second skin. Cold wrapped the world beyond the door. Warmth fought to stay inside. He watched them come and felt the house recoil as if the very beams remembered older violences. They dismounted without a word, the horse's hoofs stamping steam into the cold air. One of them smeared mud on the doorframe like a signature. The leader's hat tilted back, revealing a face Rona had hoped never to see, hard eyes, a mouth that could smile and bite at the same time. Catterling, he said when the man spoke his name like it was a brand. His voice hit the porch like a stone. Elara stepped back until the table pressed against her knees. Her shawl fell open, exposing the pale line of a scar down her wrist. Old, and speaking of past bargains. Catterling's laugh was small and cruel. Thought I'd come see my property, he said. How's the asking price? Ronan's answer was a flat line. You'll leave. Catterling cocked his head. Now that's a funny phrase. He reached into his coat slowly, and the motion cast shadow. The men around him shifted like sharks smelling blood. The quiet broke then. A plate crashed in the kitchen. Elara had knocked it, stepping back. Noise exploded with the dull, human sound of something ordinary undone. Rowan's hand found the rifle and raised it in one swift motion. Cattering's men moved like they had rehearsed it 1,000 times, one blocking the porch, another taking the corner. There was calm in their movement that made the blood in Ronan's ears run hot. Catterling stepped forward, boots scuffing the boards, eyes never leaving Elara. Give me what's mine, he said softly. Or I take it one way or another. Ronan's finger tightened on the trigger. Not to fire, yet, but to make the point that they were no answerless house. Elara's teeth chattered, but she did not scream. Cold had stripped the sound from her throat. She looked at Ronan, and in that look was a mix of plea and promise. He nodded once, a tiny movement that carried the weight of every prior lonely night. Catterling smiled. Pleasant, he said. So we'll do this easy. Hand her over, and you keep your boards. Rowan spat on the porch floor, an old, small defiance. Not happening. For a heartbeat the world hung between the click of a rifle catch and the creak of an old beam. Then Catterling's hand moved faster than Ronan expected. A pistol glinted in his grip, cold as moonlight. Gunfire flared, sharp, bright, an animal ripping the night. Wood splintered near Ronan's shoulder. The house shook with the impact. Dust fell like grief. Elara slammed the table hard enough that cups jumped and clattered to the floor. Her breath came out in a sound Ronan had not heard from her until now, raw, fierce. It cut through the chaos and gave him focus. He fired once toward the trees where the men crouched, a warning and a promise packaged in smoke. The night answered with more shots. The cold tasted like iron on his tongue. Warmth from the stove was a half-forgotten memory as adrenaline hammered heat through his veins. They ducked behind the counter, the house a brittle shell around the small collision. Noise filled every cavity, shouts, the bark of horses, the whine of bullets through wood. Silence was gone, replaced by the dense, purposeful racket of a life under assault. Rowan felt the rifle kick under his hands. Elara pressed herself against his side, nails digging into his forearm. He smelled her hair, hot and sweet against the gunpowder tang. A round punch through the pantry door. Flour burst out like a pale cloud, turning the kitchen into a brief blizzard of white. The world became noise and motion in the single, sharp choice that would decide whether this place stayed a home or crumbled under a debt called due. The first bullet slammed into the pantry wall, sending another burst of flour into the kitchen air. Ronan dragged Elara behind the counter, the rifle hot in his hands, the wood trembling with each hit the house took. Noise hammered every wall, gunfire, men shouting, the frantic scream of a frightened horse. Warmth from the stove barely held on against the cold violence pouring through every crack. Elara clung to his sleeve, breathless, eyes wide. Ronan. He shook his head once. Not fear. Not surrender. Decision. He rose just enough to sight the porch post. A man crouched behind it. Ronan fired once. The man's rifle clattered to the floorboards with a hollow metallic cry. Silence didn't return. It shifted, tighter, meaner. Kettering's voice cut through the chaos. Ronan Hale. Bring her out, and we end this clean. Ronan tasted gunpowder and cold air. Nothing about you is clean, he muttered. Elara flinched at a stray bullet shattering a ceramic bowl behind them. Porcelain rained across the counter in tiny white shards. She grabbed his arm. Run, she whispered. You can still run. Rowan turned. Warmth in his chest battled cold fury rising behind his ribs. No, he said. I left things once. Never again. He moved for the back door, Elara tight behind him. Outside, the night dropped cold as iron. Snowflakes, late, thin ones, drifted sideways on the wind, settling on Elara's air like warnings made visible. Two more men rounded the side of the house. Ronan didn't hesitate. He fired. One stumbled into the trough. The other dove behind the woodpile. Noise cracked open the stillness of the yard. Horses screamed again. A lantern toppled. Fire licked at dry straw. Elara saw it first. The barn. Smoke twisted into the air, then, desperate, hungry. Warmth where warmth shouldn't be. A threat with its own heartbeat. Ronan grabbed her hand. Keep low. They darted along the fence line, shadows swallowing them between the posts. Ronan moved with purpose, breath clouding in white bursts, each step a promise carved into cold earth. A bullet struck the fence inches from Elara's shoulder. Splinters sprayed her cheek. She didn't scream. She kept moving. At the hayshed, Ronan lifted her behind a stack of feed sacks. Shelter. For one heartbeat. Stay here, he said. Elara, stay. Her hands grabbed his coat. You'll die. He leaned close, closer than he'd allowed himself all this time. I'm not the one he wants. He limped from me. That gives you time. Tears warmed her lashes. Cold wind stole the warmth as fast as it formed. But she let go. Ronan stepped out, rifle raised, into the space between barn and house, a funnel of wind, gunpowder, and moonlight. His boots crunched frost. Noise returned in a roar. Catterling emerged from behind the well, coat flapping like a crow's wings. Always knew you'd stand in my way, he said, voice calm, hand steady on his pistol. You'll leave, Ronan said. You'll leave her be. Cattering smirked. You think you can rewrite debts with a bullet? Ronan sighted down the rifle. Not rewriting. Just ending. Gunfire erupted. 2 shots, one from Kettering, one from Ronan, collided in sound. Cold tore the air apart. Warmth rushed through Ronan's arms with the recoil. Kettering staggered, hit in the shoulder. His men faltered. Fear rippled. Elara ran from the shed, unable to stay hidden as the man who'd ruined her life steadied himself for another shot. Elara, no. But she was already moving. Kettering swung the pistol toward her. A beam groaned overhead. The wind shoved smoke across his aim. Ronan fired again. Kettering fell. This shot didn't hit his shoulder. It ended the argument. Silence cracked like thin ice. Noise drained away. Only the distant whine of settling wood and the soft, pitiful hiss of dying fire remained. Elara collapsed into Ronan's chest, sobbing against the cold fabric of his coat. Warm tears. Cold wind. Noise of her breathing. Silence in the aftermath. Ronan wrapped an arm around her, rifle dangling at his side. "It's over," he said softly. "God help us both. It's over." But even as the night stilled, the snow thickened around their feet, a reminder that endings are only quieter storms waiting to pass. The fire in the yard hissed itself out in a thin ribbon of smoke, curling into the cold dawn like a secret trying to vanish. Ronan sat on the porch steps, rifle across his knees, breath coming in slow, uneven clouds. The world hadn't stopped spinning, but it felt like it had paused, waiting to hear what came next. Inside the house, Elara stood by the table with her hands pressed against the wood. Warmth from the stove reached her fingertips. Cold held everything else. She watched Ronan through the window as though afraid he might disappear between one blink and the next. The day felt too quiet, too thin. Noise had carried the night, silence carried the morning. When she finally stepped outside, her boots crunched over frost. Ronan didn't look back, but he felt her presence like a shift in the air. She stopped beside him. Her shawl tugged in the wind. "I need to tell you everything," she said. He nodded without lifting his gaze. "Then tell me." She sat beside him, leaving a small space between them, a space filled with breath, memory, and the echo of gunfire. Her voice came slow, fragile, but steady. "When you left for the war." Her throat tightened. "I waited. Every day, every letter, every name on the casualty lists." Ronan's jaw clenched. Warmth drained from his face. Cold pooled behind his eyes. "You think I wanted to leave?" he said quietly. "I thought I'd be gone months, not years." "I know," she whispered. "But the town didn't wait. People talk. People assume. And when they stopped hearing your name, they told me you were dead." A gust of morning wind pushed through the boards, making the porch groan. Noise filled the silence with something brittle. Elara wrapped her arms around herself. "I was alone. My parents were drowning and dead. Kettering came with promises, said he'd clear everything if I signed his ledger. That's how he described it." Rowan's breath hitched. "Ledger, not marriage." Her eyes glistened. He never used the word, not until the ink dried. Warmth flickered from the kitchen window behind them. Cold pressed hard against their backs. Truth sat between them like a brand. "When I tried to run the first time," she continued, "he showed me how he handles disobedience. Not with fists, with ownership." Her voice shook. "But when I heard you might still be alive, I tried again." Rowan finally looked at her. Really looked. "What made you think I was still out here?" She reached into her shawl and pulled out a folded, weather-worn letter. Edges frayed. Ink faded. "I found this at a trader's camp," she said. "He said he'd carried it from a soldier who never found your homestead." Rowan unfolded it with trembling hands. The name scrawled at the top was his. The handwriting was unmistakable, his brother's. Inside, just a few lines. A plea. A direction. A promise that Ronan was alive, working the ranch, waiting for word. Ronan's chest tightened. "My brother wrote this," he whispered. "He was trying to bring you back to me, and Kettering intercepted the rest," she said. "Every letter, every message, everything meant for me or sent by me. He burned the ones he didn't like." The wind rolled across the yard, rattling the tools hanging on the shed wall. A reminder of the night before, of what had nearly been lost. Ronan closed his eyes. Warmth pressed behind them. Pain, grief, something like relief. You weren't running from someone you owed, he said. You were running back to someone you loved. Elara exhaled shakily. I thought, if you were still alive, even if you didn't want me anymore, being near your land would feel like safety. Ronan reached out slowly, gently. His hand touched hers on the step, warm skin meeting cold morning. Elara, he breathed. I never stopped wanting you. Noise swelled in his ears, the distant call of a crow, the soft crack of ice melting on the trough, the quiet hitch of her breath. Silence wrapped the rest of the world. She leaned against him, just enough to break the space between them, just enough to let the truth settle. But micro-tension lingered in the yard. Caroling lay dead. But men like him did not live alone in their cruelty. And the echo of last night's shots still clung to the hills. Ronan watched the horizon as if expecting another rider, another dead, another shadow. Elara followed his gaze. What happens now? He didn't answer right away. Warmth from the rising sun combed through their hair. Cold still lay in the shade of the barn. Finally, he said, now we build something honest. And if anyone comes for you again, they'll find a different man waiting. Elara breathed out slowly, a breath that fogged in the morning air before dissolving into light. She slipped her fingers between his, warmth overtaking cold, noise softening into peace. The truth had broken open, and with it, the path home. The morning sun rose slow over the ridge, spilling warm gold across the yard like someone had finally remembered to paint the world in color again. Rowan stood by the fence, hands resting on the top rail, watching the horses nose at fresh hay. Their breaths puffed in soft white clouds, warm animals in a cold world. A welcome contrast. Behind him, the house murmured with quiet life. The kettle whistled. Floorboards creaked under gentle footsteps. Small sounds. Home sounds. Elara stepped onto the porch with a shawl around her shoulders, hair loose and catching the sunlight. She paused a moment, eyes soft, cautious, almost reverent. The simple peace of the morning seemed like something she didn't quite trust yet. Then she walked toward him. Boots brushing frost. Warm breath in cold air. Silence stretching between them, but not the heavy kind. Not anymore. Rona turned as she reached the fence. You sleep any? A little, she said. Better than I have in years. He nodded. Good. They stood together, looking out over the land. The ranch was quiet, save for the light clatter of a horse kicking a bucket and the soft whisper of wind moving over a grass. Noise that carried no threat, only rhythm. But even peace has its shadows. At the 250-word mark, a wagon rattled down the distant road, its wheels bouncing over stones. Elara stiffened before she recognized the shape, old Tom Burley with his sacks of feed. Just a neighbor. Just a wagon. Still, the reminder lingered. Tracks could lead in either direction. Not all riders were friendly. Ronan placed a steady hand on the rail near hers, close enough she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. You're safe here, he said quietly. She nodded, though her breath trembled just a little. Safety was a new language. She was still learning its letters. Inside, they prepared breakfast together. Ronan chopped vegetables with blunt, patient strokes. Elara stirred the pot, the spoon tapping the side in a soft, rhythmic clank. The stove hummed, wrapping them in steady warmth. The house felt different now. Not haunted. Not waiting. Alive. When they sat down to eat, Elara reached across the table and touched his wrist, light, deliberate, a promise made without words. Ronan didn't pull away. Didn't pretend he didn't feel the spark of heat that ran up his arm. Instead, he turned his hand palm up and held hers. Soft warmth against callous strength. Noise softened to a hush. Silence deepened into ease. After breakfast, they walked the property together. The sun had burned off the frost, leaving the grass damp and shining. Bird song scattered through the trees like bits of laughter. Elara breathed it in, each inhale a little steadier than the last. They reached the barn, the one Kittering's men had nearly set afire. There were scorch marks along the lower beams, ghosts of a violence that hadn't finished its task. She paused there, fingers touching the blackened wood. Ronan watched her carefully. "You don't have to look at it." "I do," she answered. Her voice didn't shake. Warm light from the doorway fell across her face. Cold memory brushed her spine. She stood between the two and chose neither. She chose the present. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For standing." He stepped closer. "So did you." She let out a breath that sounded like something being released after years of being held too tight. The barn swayed gently in the breeze. A horse nickered from its stall, impatient for grain. Life, imperfect but persistent, demanded tending. Together they fetched feed, filled buckets, and brushed the horses. Warm bodies, soft snorts. Even the animals sensed the shift, less tension, more calm. At the 500-word mark, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. Elara went still. Rowan reached for her hand automatically, grounding her. But the rider turned toward town. Just a passerby. Nothing more. Her shoulders eased slowly. The threat was gone, but echoes have long legs. Later, they repaired defense Kittering's men had splintered. Ronan held the rail steady while Elara hammered in the new nails. Each strike rang through the morning, sharp, bright notes of rebuilding. They worked in rhythm. Warmth from effort. Cold breeze tugging their clothes. Noise filling the spaces where fear used to live. By afternoon, the fence stood straight again. No scars except the kind that said, "We survived." We stayed standing. They returned to the porch as the sun dipped low. Shadows stretched long and gentle across the yard. Crickets tuned their legs. The air cooled. Rowan leaned against the beam. Elara rested beside him, shoulder against his arm. No hesitance now. No permission needed. "You think peace will hold?" she asked softly. Rowan looked out across the land, his land, their land now, and felt the old creaking beams of his lives settled into something steady. "It will," he said. "As long as we keep choosing it." She smiled into the quiet. Warmth rose between them, subtle and sure. The house behind them creaked. The same old timber sound at once echoed loneliness, now softened into something gentle. The audio anchor returning not as sorrow, but as comfort. A home exhaling. Noise and silence finally in balance. Ronan took her hand. Elara leaned her head on his shoulder. The sun slipped behind the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, the darkness carried no fear, only rest.